What's going on? Oh,
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome aboard. We are getting ready for another journey, and our three steps will be once again, we're going to cover going on this week in the calendar, what's going on in the Parshah, and then we'd like to look and search for a practical, relevant life message from this week's Parshah, help us and empower us to do what we need to do to bring Mashiach and make it our reality more so than ever. We are going to start off with what's going on in the calendar. It is a very, very special week. Um, for recent Hasidic calendar highlights, we have in this week the 22nd day of the month of Shvat. Chof Beis Shvat is the yard site, the day of passing, the Hilula of the Rebbe's wife, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, who for many, many years was the unsung hero, who, without even being recognizable to the majority of the Chassidim who lived literally round the corner from her, she was almost unknown to so many people, and that's what she chose, and that's how she really wanted her life to be. And throughout her lifetime, there were many stories of where Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka would avoid the limelight almost at all costs. She wouldn't go to shul because she didn't want to be made into a big Rebbetzin. She didn't want people to have to step aside for her or make things be known to her. She used to go to different stores, and when she was once in the store and someone mentioned, "Oh, this is Lubavitcher Rebbetzin," and all of a sudden they see parted, of course, and everyone let her go to the front, it was absolutely the last time she went to the store because this was so not her nature. Yet, after Chof Beis Shvat, after the 22nd day of Shvat, the Rebbe made it his business to make her life be so known, be so famous, and encourage people to have her picture, encourage people to name their children after her, and to teach people what she stood for, the regal royalty, if you like, of how she carried herself, yet being so enormously humble and approachable to anyone and everyone. She was extremely scholarly and learned and studied. And if I'm not mistaken, she even um, she designed a revolver that was used in the American Army. She was an extremely talented woman, and more than anything, she was extremely caring. The Rebbe spoke words after her passing about how much he relied on her and how much she was his stronghold that allowed him to be able to do the work that he could. There was an expression at the end of the Shloshim, end of the 30 days of mourning, where the Rebbe says that it's hard, difficult to imagine how the halacha requires us to stop and slow down in our mourning at the end of 30 days. That's how intense the relationship was. One of the famous stories that are often told about between the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, they didn't have that much time to sit together. The Rebbe had an extremely difficult schedule every day, all day, and throughout the years. But the Rebbe would always make sure that there was warm food waiting for the Rebbe when he came home or whatever time that was, whether it was late at night, early morning, or already when it became morning itself. And she had all sorts of ways of how she kept the food fresh yet still warm. And she would always wait up for her husband for the Rebbe. And there was also a 10-minute or a few minutes of a tea where they would drink together and there was nothing else in the world. And the Rebbe once referred to that time to somebody explaining just how precious and important it is to be able to have that time. But the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, one of my favorite stories about Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka is the time when the women from the Sheikh Chabad brought a beautiful gift for Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, probably for Chaf Adar or whenever it was on her birthday. And together with the beautiful gift came a letter with a list of names and names that needed brachas. And the idea was that the card and the letters would be brought to the Rebbe for brachas, and the gift would be given to the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. But on the envelope, whoever was that put it together had written the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka's name. So when they brought the gift, and the gift was going to be given to the Rebbe sent the gift together with a card. And someone tried to explain to the Rebbe that the card is for brachas, and therefore it should go to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, "Don't worry, she can also give brachas. She's very capable of giving a bracha." And often the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka's brachas were what you would call no strings attached. The Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka appreciated. There's another famous remark that she had with her very good friend, Mrs. Khan, Leah Khan, who was the wife of Father Khan. And they were close friends from way back when. And once Father Khan's wife, Leah Khan, was talking about the shluchais, the wives of the shluchim, whatever. And the Rebbetzin was trying to make a point that it's extremely difficult and it's very hard for them. And Mrs. Khan wasn't really buying into it. And Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka made such a strong point. She was almost like emotionally explaining that for a young woman to pick herself up and to leave whatever it is that she was accustomed to and to bring up a family without her regular surroundings is such a big deal. It was so much on her heart and she was so passionate about it. That's one of the windows that we got into seeing just how much the Rebbe was in touch with and aware and felt the journey of every single particular individual. Just a story from local Manchester. Manchester has a very strong connection, especially Mrs. Leah Cohen and her parents and grandparents, where someone once asked in the Rebbetzins' house, "Where are your children?" Obviously, it wasn't a comfortable question to ask. The Rebbetzin never had her own children. And without batting an eye, the Rebbetzin said her children are 770, and she meant it. Her children, each and every one of her husband's followers, and she felt like their mother in a big way, and caring for each of her and every one of us in Klal Yisrael. So come Chaf Beis Shvat, which is coming up this week, it's important for us to remember that we have a gift. And although we can't see the Rebbetzin, and during the lifetime we knew even less about her, the Rebbe made it part of our reality that there's so much available today about Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. And of course, the energy is in the air, and the brachas are ours. And it's a very important day on our calendar. Alongside with that important day of Chaf Beis Shvat comes with also the Chaf Beis Shvat weekend. Once a year, they have all the shluchim gathered together around Rosh Chodesh Kislev, Shabbos and Varchim Chodesh Kislev. The shluchais, the Rebbetzins of the Chabad houses around the world, gathered together, which will be this coming weekend. The Kinos HaShluchais, the conference of the Rebbetzins from around the world. And of course, it's much more logistics to be able to navigate, to bring all the women together. Many of them come with their children, with their babies if they have to. But it's a very important step, and the Rebbe felt like it was important to make sure that they are honored in the background. I'm just going to mute if you can unmute if you want. But along with that, also, what also is very logistically challenging is all the husbands that stay behind and all of a sudden start to realize just how much the wife does at home and the jokes that go around abound. Obviously, you have a lot of truth that ring to them, but all of a sudden the guys are trying to figure out the laundry and the cooking and the cleaning and just how to warm up the food that's in the freezer, etc. But that's joking apart. It's a very important time because even if we ourselves may not be at the Kinnus HaShluchais, when that many Jewish women get together and their sole purpose is to recharge, rejuvenate, encourage each other to come back and give to their communities more and to do more to make Mashiach be our reality for real. Now, that is an energy that certainly reverberates around the whole globe, and it's a time where we draw out of the energy. If you want to join into the Kinnus HaShluchas and watch the banquet, the keynote speakers, and the rest. It's all available for free online. I think it's probably chabad.org/kinos or something, or live, something like that. I'm sure you get the links. But it's a special time. It's a special time of upliftedness. And as we said before, Rebbetzin Chaim Mishka cared and gave brachas, and very often no strings attached. Just it should be good for Yiddish people. It should be good for all of the world, and good things should happen. Amen. Ken Yehi Ratzon. So it's a special, energetic time. I'm going to shift now from calendar, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the parsha. And what we'll find is that it's very appropriate to be reading this week's parsha in this term, in this time. So what's this week's parsha about? If we do a quick recap of what we did from the beginning of the Sefer of Shemos, the book of Exodus, we start off with the Jewish people coming down into Egypt, the slavery, the Exodus, we left Egypt, the splitting of the Red Sea, and then we come to the foot of Mount Sinai, which is last week's Sedra. And then last week we read Hashem said the Ten Commandments to the Jewish people, and at the end of the Ten Commandments, we have the whole story of the Yiddish people passing out, Hashem revived them. In the end, we have the halacha of the Mizbeach, and then this week's Sedra opens up. What's this week's Sedra start off with? Following the revelation of Har Sinai. After last week's 10 Commandments, top 10, miraculous fireworks display, and the whole commotion of giving the Torah, we have how Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain and he teaches the people the halachas, the mitzvahs of the Torah. The name of the parsha, Mishpatim. Mishpat is judgment. And Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us the laws that he learned from Hashem. And he's teaching us and they include very, very basic, you might call very similar to civil law, to secular law, to modern law. You have the laws of penalties for murderers, for kidnapping, for assault, for theft, and all sorts of civil law for damages and repayments, loans, and if somebody is a paid guardian, a custodian, someone who borrows, someone who rents, all of that's included in the halachas in this week's Sedra. Many of them are mitzvahs on the Beis Din and the courts. And the mitzvahs for the court to judge and adjudicate in each such case according to the way the Torah delineates the halacha should be. So although we would imagine that the judge has to be a very wise person and therefore should be able to figure out what the law should be, the judge's responsibility, as delineated in this week's Sedra, is not to figure out what he would say is the most appropriate approach. Rather, he's to use his wisdom, or their wisdom, to figure out what Hashem would say. What does Hashem want us to say in such and such a case? These halachas are very specific in the laws of civil and criminal law, and they also include some law which you might call ritual law or traditional law, laws of traditions. For example, the different Yomim Tovim have halachas of what's included, which Yom Tov, the Trumas and Maasros, the agriculture gifts, which ones have to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. You have the halachas of milk and meat, what's kosher food, what's not kosher food, how kosher food can become unkosher. And all of these laws, or many of these laws, are included in Parshas Mishpatim. All in all, it says here that Parshas Mishpatim contains 53 mitzvahs. 23 of them are the don'ts, are the do's. 23 of them are the do's, and 30 don'ts, prohibitions. And that makes the bulk of maybe 2/3 of the parsha. When we get to Shishi, all of a sudden, the parsha takes a swing. And it's important to put it into perspective. And what we're going to talk about today mainly will be about what we're about to discuss here. What's the second part, the last third of the parsha discussing? Hashem promises to bring the Yid into the land of Eretz Yisrael. And he warns us about going in their pagan ways. And then all of a sudden, we start reading about the Jewish people at that time proclaiming their commitment to the general idea of keeping Torah, of keeping all the mitzvahs. The famous quote, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear all that Hashem commands to us, is in this week's Sedra. So although we read about the Ten Commandments being given last week, standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, the reference to Na'aseh v'nishma is in Parshas Mishpatim, and we're famous. We know that we are told that Hashem was so happy to hear the commitment of the Jewish people, Na'aseh v'nishma, can be rewarded every single yid, every single Jewish person at the time with two crowns, metaphorical crowns. One was for Na'aseh and one was for Nishma. So let's just put into English what it is that we're talking about, and then we'll move on to the end of the session and we'll talk about one practical lesson. When we say that the Jewish people responded Na'aseh v'nishma, the way to explain that is probably to use the simple joke. Why are there so many Jewish lawyers? Because at the beginning of the Jewish time, we signed on the dotted lines without reading the contract. And from since then, we have made sure to read every contract well. And we understand contracts, and we understand documents. Well, that's the joke. What's the reality? The reality is that's exactly what we did. Hashem came to us through Moshe and said, would you accept the Torah of Hashem? And our response is, yes, absolutely. Now tell us the details. So we had no idea what we were signing on. We didn't know what was going to be included. But we said, if this is what Hashem wants from us, we're in. Now tell us the details. Na'aseh, we're going to do it. Now tell us what it is that we're going to do. Amazing. Fascinating. Before we go anywhere, we just want to explain that however crazy that might sound, and however absurd it is to say yes to something that we don't know the details, the best way to explain what was going on is not that we were foolish, but is that we were saying yes to something much larger than the details. Yes was yes to the relationship between us and Hashem. What exactly are we going to have to do to make this work? We're going to figure it out. It's so worth anything and everything in the world to become into that relationship between us and Hashem. We are so ready to say yes to that. It makes no difference what the details will be. Because whatever those details will include, it's about doing it for Hashem. It's doing it, but not just for a significant other, for the most significant other. I don't know if you call Hashem any other, but it's the biggest investment you can ever imagine. So when the Yiddish people had an opportunity, would you like to get into a very deep personal relationship with Hashem? The answer was yes. Now tell us how to do it. The way that sounded, though, the way that expressed itself was Na'aseh v'nishma. We are in. Now tell us how to make it work. And that is this week's Sedra. It's in Parshas Mishpatim. And the last part of the Sedra. One more interesting thought about, we said there was two crowns rewarded to the Jewish people. When a lot of the Sikhs describe and discuss, why do we get two crowns? We should only get one. The first one is for Na'aseh, the commitment to be willing to do whatever Hashem wants. Yeah, that's very praiseworthy, reward-worthy. Got it. What's the second crown for? Because we agreed to listen to what the details are. Well, that's the only way we're going to carry out Na'aseh. The only way we can do what we committed to do is by finding out the details. Why does that deserve a second crown? Why does it deserve such a reward? Because we know we're going to listen to the details. So there are many an answer to that. And Chassidus makes a big emphasis on one particular answer, and that is, it's not just we're going to find out what the do's and the don'ts are. We're not just going to be blind sheep following the leader, or follow blindly like sheep, sorry. Nishma means we are going to do whatever we can that our gray matter, our own personal rationale, intelligence, whatever it is we can muster, whatever understanding we can, we're going to try to make sense of what it is that Hashem tells us to do. But in that order. First, we commit. Regardless if it will or will not make sense, our faith is first. But we don't stop there. Once we've already committed and true pure faith, we now say, Nishma, we will in addition to that also work hard to learn, to try and understand and grapple, to be able to become part of. Our thinking should think like Hashem as much as possible. And whatever is not possible, whatever we don't get, we're still committed to, because that was first. And these are two very important steps. Naaseh gets one crown. This tremendous commitment to doing and accepting whatever Hashem says, so praiseworthy and reward worthy. We get a crown for that. And the fact that we don't stay just like sheep towing the line, but instead we use the human gift, the God-given intelligence that we have. That's limited because it's human intelligence, it's not godly intelligence, but we do the best we can to try and lift ourselves up. That is a second praiseworthy, reward-worthy achievement that Hashem says a second crown for the Nishma, for coming to tonight's Torah class. You've showed up tonight. Shkoyach. This is Nishma. The fact that we learn Torah and we accept Torah is great, but we're going to try and understand a bit more. That's a whole second crown. Just to put a little bit of imagery to this, Baruch Hashem, our baby is Kenan, our 7, almost 8 months old. When she wants to be picked up, what does she do? She goes and talk. So she lifts her hands up. She wants to go up. She can lift her hands from today to tomorrow. It's not going to pick her up. She's not going to get herself off the ground. But that's the best she can do. When her siblings or parents see her trying to get up, her lifted hands are a call. It's a try. It has zero chance of working, but it does enough to trigger whoever it is that can pick her up. Oh, boom. And in a similar way, Nishma, we try and understand. We try and get Hashem's wisdom. We're humans. Human wisdom compared to godly wisdom, what are the chances? It's not even zero. It's less than that. But we lift our hands. We try the best we can. Hashem loves it. However much we love to see a little baby wanting to be picked up, Hashem sees us even more so. And that's Naaseh v'Nishma, this week's Sedra. There's a little bit more in this week's Sedra that goes on. In this week's Sedra, besides us saying how Moshe asks the Jewish people, and they say Naaseh v'Nishma, we also have, in the end of the Parshah, that Moshe Rabbeinu goes up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and he leaves behind his deputies, Aaron, his brother, and Hor, his brother-in-law, his nephew. Hor is his nephew. And Aaron and Hor are going to be in charge of the camp, and their job will be to try and answer any questions that come up and to navigate any challenges. And then Moshe goes up the mountain, and he's there for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the Torah. And that's the end of the Parsha. Moshe Rabbeinu is up the mountain. Now, of course, we're going to say he's the best student, Moshe Rabbeinu himself, learning from the best teacher, Hashem himself, the best topic, the whole Torah, and in the place of zero disturbances, he's up in heaven. There's no phone reception there, no one's sending him emails, WhatsApp, or I don't know, Facebook. He's just learning the whole time, and it's a great setup. And Moshe Rabbeinu, oh boy, does he learn a lot. He learns all the Torah Sheba'al Peh, all the spoken law, so that when he comes down the mountain, he's going to have what to teach us, including all the halachas that we just read at the beginning part of this week's Sedra. The tort law, criminal law, civil law, and the rest. Moshe Rabbeinu is picking it up and learning it in heaven. Okay, this is the summary of Parshas Mishpatim. Before we click the slide, of course, if anyone has any questions or comments or suggestions, now is a good time to unmute, Alt-A or spacebar. And we're going to say that we're going to focus on today that last part of the Sedra that talks about the Naaseh v'Nishma, talks about Moshe Rabbeinu going up the mountain and the rest, all of that, and we're going to try and fit it into the timeline of history. What happened where? And this is what we're going to focus on. Hannah, you okay? Okay. Okay. So we're jumping right in, and of course, we try and start off with we start off with the end. We put it in a question format, and then hopefully we'll come back and we'll circle back to this. And we're going to do the exercise is called 2 stories in 1. 2 stories in 1 is the answer. The question is, in a relationship, which one catches your eye first? What one does, or why they do it? Now, one and they, who is doing it and why they are doing it, you can use whichever relationship comes to mind. Which one of these 2 elements in a relationship our first impact? What one person is doing, so what they're doing, or why, the motive of why they're doing it? Help me out.
Hmm.
If you're going to answer, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, just to describe what relationship you're thinking of, and then tell me which one comes first in that relationship.
If you're speaking to a child,
Child, so parent, child, teacher, child. Let's go teacher, child.
you could do teacher child.
Okay.
What one does
Yes.
is what the child is doing,
Yes.
and it's for you to find out why they're doing it.
Okay.
But
So
could
which
be,
one's more, which one comes first?
well, if the teacher's looking at the child, the first one is what the child is doing, and the second one is how you should respond to what the child is doing.
Correct.
However, you could
Yes.
also be in a atmosphere of a class or a home looking at a child doing something, and then you then have to decide um, what you should do about it. It can be reversed. It can be either or. It's one of those things that can be either or, and surely that's it in other relationships as well as in some ways.
Great. Well said. Well said. I'm going to say that if I just summarize, if we just look at, let's say from the teacher parent side, what I observe is first, and that's what's being done. And then it's down to me to be able to try and figure out or extrapolate somehow from what I'm observing what the motive of that action is. Are we on the same page? Is that right? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
it. I like it. Thank you. Anyone else want to share a relationship that comes to mind and how that might play itself out?
Well, the
Right?
the Jewish people, because of the experience at Sinai,
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing was the commandments of God.
Uh-huh.
And why they did it is to be questioned later. You know,
Okay.
there's a lot of things like mitzvahs and things, and there's a lot of things that we do and we don't know why specifically, but we know it's good for us.
Like it. Okay. That's a more of a spiritual or Yiddishkeit one. Okay, we'll put that one also in there. Has anyone else want to weigh in on this? I'm going to say which of these two, before we get to the next question, let's just go back to Mrs. Abrams' example for a second. Although for the teacher slash parent, they observe first the action and they have to try and extrapolate the motive. From the child's perspective, there was first a motive,
Mm.
a mood, an atmosphere, or whatever else it is, and that's propelled them to act.
Mm.
So really, although we observe this side first, the starting point for us is that, but the starting point is really the motive why someone does what they do, and then what they do. So that brings me to the next question, which is more important? Now, in order to make this a little bit more closer to home, or maybe more of a question, let's just think in the case of two adults, where it's not a teacher and a student, a parent and a child, one's educating the other. We're talking about two parties trying to relate to each other. Let's just say a spouse or siblings or whatever else it may be, and something is being done, and there's a reason why it's being done. Which is the more important of the two, the action or the motive?
Maybe the reaction is the most important thing.
Oh, that was a
That's,
third option. It wasn't in there.
well,
Okay, I like it though.
it has to be in a relationship between two people, depending on what's happened in the day, what day of the month it is, what's gone on before, what's going to go on after. There are so many things. There has to be something that just starts it off, and it's sometimes very difficult. Though women are quite lucky because they have a way of looking at a situation and weighing it up, and often knowing what to do because they are the piece of elastic between the husband and the children, and they're used to looking at things
Let's
and
just say
working things out.
intuition is a woman's trait, maybe.
What do you mean, maybe? No, what you meant to say was women have wonderful intuition.
Yes.
Possibly.
Yeah. Correct. 100%. There's no maybe. It's a statement from Chazal. I'm with you. I sit corrected. Correct. Okay. Anyone else? Well, you know what? I think we've given more or less this idea a lot of how it relates to us. We've given it a bit of time. We're going to say that actually between us and Hashem, I think Sylvia was getting at this, between ourselves and our Creator, between ourselves and Hashem, there is a similar kind of thing. And the Torah narrative, how we relate to Hashem, particularly around the story of the Ten Commandments and our Sinai and our acceptance of Hashem, there are the do's that we do, what we are expected to do, what we're told to do. So the mitzvahs, the practical rules. But then aside from the practical rules, there's a motive. There's a drive that isn't just the sum total of what we did and didn't do. It's a relationship, and it's very personal. It's a relationship between me or whatever that is, however I'm up to, whichever part of the month, whichever reality, or whichever circumstance I'm in, my personal relationship with my Eibusher, my God. And yes, there are the do's and the don'ts, the action points, but those are just actions. The motive is much deeper than that as well. And what we're going to learn is that they're both important, and they don't always have exactly the same recipe. Although they usually should overlap and converge and be one and the other, there are two separate efforts that are made, and they are actually taught to us in the Torah as two separate things. Why is that important? Because first of all, it helps us learn about relationships in general. And more importantly, it helps us realize that Hashem has so understood us. I mean, He made us, but He understands us so well. He so knows what it is what it takes to be able to do, to right, and stay on straight and narrow. And there's all-encompassing Eibishter creation relationship. So this is what we're going to look for, and it's going to be a big part of how Rashi teaches us the timeline of these few seders. So before we get into reading text, I'm going to say the giving of the Torah is a very, very special story. But if you read the book, it's not designed in the Torah book to be a drama movie. It's not a history book. You start reading from chapter 1, you make it through to the last chapter, and you read a nice long story. Because the point of the Torah isn't to be a history book. More importantly, the point of the Torah is, yes, to be a book of teachings. Torah actually comes from the word hoira'ah, which means instructions. So teaching this history for the sake of history, I'm not going to get into whether we should or we shouldn't be learning history in school, but the point of history is to be an instruction for the future, to help us think about what's important in life. And Torah is here to teach us instructions. And therefore, we don't find the story of the giving of the Torah in one long continuum. We've got to piece it together. And you can imagine there's more than one opinion exactly how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. One thing is clear, that it's not written in chronological order, which means there'll be pieces of this story that happen later, but are recorded earlier. That's clear. The discussion is going to be, how much are we going to try and read the Torah to be talking in an order of a timeline? And how much are we going to say, you know what, that's just too convoluted to be able to fit that into the wording. We're going to go back to saying, actually, this is also out of timely order. This happened later, this happened earlier. We're going to follow Rashi. And what we're going to basically say is Rashi's choice of explanation teaches us a wealth of life message. So what Rashi explains to us, well, first we're going to understand what Rashi says. And then we say, hold on a second. What Rashi just showed us is pointing out an enormous life message that the Torah is telling us that we may have missed had Rashi not said what he said, and had the Rebbe not pointed out how to see what Rashi is saying. Okay, that's today's class in a nutshell. Let's see it inside. We're starting off with last week's Sedra, which is the beginning, the first time the Torah tells us anything about the story of Mount Sinai. Here we go. So this is chapter 19, and it's from the beginning. In the 3rd month of the children of Israel's departure from Egypt, on this day they arrived at the desert of Sinai. Okay? So we now know when they've arrived at Har Sinai, and they've come all the way from Egypt, and they're now at Mount Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim, and they arrived in the desert of Sinai, and they camped in the desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. So we're at the foot of Mount Sinai, right there, Har Sinai. Moshe ascends to Hashem, and Hashem called him from the mountain, saying, so shall you say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel. What should Moshe tell them? You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to me. Hashem says, Moshe, tell the people to realize what they've had. Miracles. They were slaves, and they've come out of slavery, and they're here now standing in front of Hashem. And now, if you obey me and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a treasure out of all peoples, for mine is the entire earth. Hashem says, I've got all the people on earth. They're all mine. But if you agree to accept the Torah and mitzvahs, I'm Segula, a treasured nation, and you shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Moshe is instructed to pass on this message. The following pasuk, verse 7, Moshe came down the mountain and summoned the elders of Israel and placed them before them all these words that Hashem had commanded him. And all the people replied in unison and said, all that Hashem has spoken we shall do. It doesn't say Nasa and Ishma. That's quoted in this week's Sedra, as we just explained. But it says, Nasa, we agree, we're in. Moshe took the words of the people back to Hashem. He rushed back to Hashem. He says, this is the good news. The people have agreed. Now, of course, Hashem knew that the people had agreed. But Moshe still goes up the mountain and says, you sent me on a mission. I'm coming back with the answer. And Hashem says to Moshe, behold, I am coming to you in the thickness of the cloud in order that the people hear when I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever. Moshe relayed the words of the people to Hashem. Moshe again has a message to Hashem. The Jewish people had heard and accepted. They want Hashem to speak to them directly. Hashem said to Moshe, go to the people and prepare them today and tomorrow, and they shall wash their garments, a whole mikveh process, and they shall be prepared for the 3rd day. For on the 3rd day, Hashem himself will descend before the eyes of all the people upon Mount Sinai. Moving right along, verse 12, and you shall set boundaries for the people around, saying, beware of ascending the mountain or touching its edge. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. No hand shall touch it, for he shall be stoned or cast down. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds after the giving of the Torah, a long drawn-out blast, then they may ascend the mountain. So Moshe descended from the mountain to the people, and he prepared the people, and they washed their garments. He said to the people, be ready for 3 days. Do not go near a woman. It should always bother me, but I actually read Rashi, and Rashi says, so that a man should not contaminate or impurify the woman for her sake. It came to pass on the 3rd day when it was morning, and there was a thunderclaps and lightning flashes, and a thick cloud was upon the mountain, and a very powerful blast of a shofar. The entire nation that was in the camp shuddered. Hashem descended upon the Mount Sinai to the peak of the mountain, and Hashem summoned Moshe to the peak of the mountain, and Moshe ascended. Here is the giving of the Torah. Nobody's on the mountain, only Moshe goes up to the top of the mountain. And as the Parshah continues, what happens next? What happens next is the 10 Commandments. Hashem spoke all these words to respond, I am God, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, and the whole 10 Commandments. Right after the 10th commandment, Lo Yisachman, do not covet. And all the people saw the voices and the torches, the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountains. The people saw and trembled, so they stood from afar. The people remained far off. Moshe drew to the opaque darkness where Hashem was. And as the Pesukim continue, Hashem says to Moshe, so shall you say to children, you have seen from the heavens, that from the heavens I have spoken with you. You shall not make images of anything that was with me, gods of silver, gods of gold. You shall not make for yourself. You've just seen absolute spirituality. Don't try and imitate. Because if you're going to make any imitation to anything spiritual, and you're going to try and imitate it in the physical, it's going to become an idol. There's nothing but Hashem, and all imitations are exactly that. And the last pasuk of last week's Sedra says, an altar of earth you should make for me, and you shall slaughter beside it your burnt offerings, and peace offerings, your sheep, your cattle, whatever name to mention, I will come to you and bless you. Okay, so far, we've only read last week's Sedra, and it seems to be going well. We have in last week's Sedra a timeline, sign and narrative of Exodus 19, chapter 19 and 20, which was last week, which basically tell us, here we got on the screen, the events leading up to Matan Torah, the divine revelation of the actual experience of Sinai, and God's caution after that against the use of any idols to represent Hashem. Okay. Now, if you noticed, there's no mention of Moshe Rabbeinu going up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. There's certainly no mention of the golden calf and Moshe smashing the tablets. Moshe Rabbeinu going back up the mountain to get the second set of tablets. None of that's mentioned last week. Instead, what we have next is the opening of this week's Parshah, Parshah Mishpatim, which tells us the laws regarding damages and the Jewish calendar cycle. We also have the promises of divine blessing and protection if the people adhere to God's commandments. That's the first part of this week's Sedra. Laws, details, the do's and the don'ts, and the blessings if we do the right thing. And this is where the tricky part comes in. The second half of this week's Sedra. Sinai narrative number 2. Just look at the chapters. We've gone from chapter 20, 3 long chapters, and now chapter 24 opens up, or not opens up in the middle, starts telling us the events leading up to Matan Torah. You notice that was the same beginning of Exodus chapter 19. Sinai narrative number 1, we've gone back to retelling the story. We're not saying it's a second time. We have once again, we'll read it in a minute. It's going to go on to say Moshe relaying God's words to the people, the Jewish people's commitment to observe the mitzvahs, and Moshe's ascent to go back up the mountain. That is the second part of this week's Parshah, almost repeating the first half of Parshas Yisro. Okay? This is the setup we're going to talk about, and of course we're going to ask ourselves, why is the Torah repeating it? And what's the deal? But that's going to be part of the question. First, let's see the text inside. We're going to scan through this quickly. This was this week's Sedra, chapter 24. Hashem says to Moshe, and to Moshe Hashem said, come up to Hashem. Aleh, El Hashem. Come up to Hashem. You and Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar. And Moshe alone shall approach Hashem to the peak of the mountain. And they shall not approach. And the people shall not ascend with him at all. So Moshe came, told it to the people, all the words of Hashem, and all the ordinances, all the commandments, and all the people answered in unison and said, all the words that Hashem spoke, and we will do. Moshe wrote all the words of Hashem. And he arose early in the morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel, all at the foot of Mount Sinai. And he sent the youths of the children of Israel, and they offered up burnt offerings, and they slaughtered peace offerings to Hashem, bulls. And Moshe took half the blood and put it into the basins, and half the blood he cast onto the altar. Part of the preparation for giving of the Torah includes 12 altars, and he's offering bulls, and he's collecting the blood from these offerings. Half goes on the altar, and half goes into basins. Not part of the regular story of the Torah, but it's here. It's in the Parshah. And he took the book of the covenant, whatever instructions they had, he had written down, and read it within the hearing of the people, the agreement that they had up until this point. And they said, all that Hashem spoke, we will do, and we will hear. And Moshe took the blood, sprinkled it on the people. He now takes the blood from the basins, sprinkles on the people, and he said, behold the blood of the covenant that Hashem has formed with you concerning these words. And then Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and you, and 70 of the elders ascend the mountain. And they perceive God of Israel. Beneath his feet was like the form of a sapphire brick, and like the appearance of the heavens for clarity. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he didn't lay his hands, and they perceived God. They ate and they drank, which wasn't a good thing. And the verse continues, and Hashem said to Moshe, now only you, only Moshe, come to me to the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets, the law and the commandments which I have written to instruct them. Now, Moshe is not just going up to be present when Hashem says the 10 commandments. Now he's coming up to bring the tablets. Let's go back. The previous verse doesn't say what he's going to do. It seems like he's going to get the Ten Commandments Hashem's going to speak. Now he's going up to get the stone tablets. So Moshe and Yeshua, his servant, arose. There's no Aaron here. No Nadav and Avihu. It's Moshe and his right-hand man, Yeshua. And Moshe himself ascends to the mountain of Hashem. Yeshua to the bound on the mountain. And to the elders he said, wait for us here until we return to you. And here Aaron and Hor are with you. Whoever has a case, let him go to them. So here we're having a slightly different story. It seems to be talking about after the giving of the Ten Commandments. Moshe is going to send the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And he leaves behind Aaron and Hor to watch the camp, whereas he and Yeshua go back to the mountain. Yeshua went to the bottom, and Moshe went up the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. There he is up the mountain. And Moshe came with the cloud, within the cloud, and he went up the mountain. Moshe was up on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So if we just recap our timeline, we haven't got a recap here. We now understand that we have first the story of the giving of the Torah. Then we have the laws of the beginning part of our Sedra. We then have a recap, a repeat of the story building up the giving of the Torah. And then for some reason, we go back to the story of what happened after the giving of the Torah. Let's put this on the screen, because after this week's Sedra, we're going to start learning next week the building of the Mishkan. The end of the building of the Mishkan, which is going to be for 2 weeks long, we're all of a sudden going to find the missing end of the story, which is after the giving of the Torah, Moshe comes down after 40 days and 40 nights and sees the golden calf, and he smashes the luchos. So, and after that, we're going to have the receiving of the Torah. So we put everything onto the screen. Here you have it. We have last week's Sedra, narrative number 1. We then have the laws in the beginning of this week's Sedra. We then have narrative number 2, which is almost a repeat. We then have the story of building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the house of Hashem, the design of the garments for the Kohanim. And then, towards the end of Kisisa, we all of a sudden have the filling in of the blanks, the golden calf, the smashing of the tablets, and the second set. Okay, this is if you read the order the Torah tells us. Now what we want to do is try and figure out, why is the Torah inserting the second narrative where it is? Why is it repeated in the first place? And why is it where it is? Especially considering that together with that second narrative, we almost had a piece of the 40 days, 40 nights thing. And the 40 days, 40 nights thing belongs in Kisisa. Or better said, Kisisa belongs before Teruma and Tetzaveh. Because the design of the Mishkan is going to take place way later. And this becomes the questions that we grapple with. When we say we mean Rashi, the Ramban. Many of the commentaries of the Torah try and figure out how to reconcile which of these pieces of history took place first, second, third, and what the order might be. Let's just see some of the questions where they sum it up here. Why does the Torah repeat the story of Matan Torah twice? And why does it do so out of order? This is what we're looking for. Now, if we're asking why, it's probably because we assume there's an answer to the why. And there is a very good answer. But before the answer of why the Torah took it out, we also need to figure out what is the correct order. So without getting too carried away, Rashi versus the Ramban. Ramban says, wherever possible, we're going to read the story of the Torah as if it's written in order. Only if we're 100% stuck and there's no way to make it work, then we'll accept that maybe the Torah is written out of order. Rashi, on the other says, in our reading, it doesn't say which chapter it is, but it's Rashi in our chapter, where it talks about here, where is it? Exodus 24:1, where it says, come up to Hashem. It says Rashi, in this week's Sedra already, we're going to say, not in order. This section was said before the Ten Commandments. Moshe was given instruction, come up on the 4th day of the month of Sivan. And Rashi is going to have to tell us that there's a general rule. The Torah does not follow a structured chronological order of events. Instead, it teaches us the order of instructions. The order the Torah chooses to teach us in is in the way we're going to get the clearest message of what we need to know for life. And that isn't history. The clearest message we need to know is, what does Hashem want from us? What does he want us to do? How does he want us to behave? And what does he want us to invest in? And that is the order, not the chronology. So the Talmud is the quote that's used here. Rav Manasseh Bar Tachlifa says in the name of Rab, there is no chronological order of early and late in the Torah. You can't prove because it was written earlier, therefore it happened earlier. Okay. And Rashi's approach is we only state that rule, that the Torah is breaking from the chronological order, when there's absolutely clear and there's no other way to read the text. The Ramban is more literal than him. We're not going to do that right now. Instead, we're going to say, the answer. The answer we're going to say, we don't have to read all the text. We're going to say the following. Rashi would like us to know the reason why we have two narratives that tell the same story. One last week and one this week. Last week's is in the chronological order, and this week's shows up after the giving of the Torah. It goes back to the beginning of the story again, is because actually each part of the story is teaching us something else. And the two things that we're learning are exactly the two things that we started off the discussion with at the beginning. The two stories, the two narratives that we have are telling us two separate important messages for life. And although it's the same story, it's a different lesson in each narrative. From the same story, teaching us something else. What are these two lessons that the Torah felt the need to repeat the same story, and the first time highlight one element, and the second time highlight the second element in the same story, and therefore found it necessary to say the same storyline twice? It's almost like it's in chronological order, it's just written twice. That's how Rashi will explain it. It's unique to understand Rashi this way. Let's just suffice to say that the Rebbe is brilliant in how he sees this in Rashi. In fact, what Rashi is saying is we're not saying it's chronological if you read the whole line, but it's chronological if you read one piece and then the second piece. And the reason why it's in two pieces is because they're teaching us two things. What are those two things? Point A, Hashem gives us a manual for how to lead a Jewish life, the do's and the don'ts. Starting from the story of preparing for Har Sinai. What do we have to do to prepare? We had to wash our garments. We had to go to mikveh. We had to refrain from marital relations. There were things that we could do and didn't do in preparation for the giving of the Torah. What was the giving of the Torah? 10 top commandments. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain after giving the Torah. What was the follow-up? Many more laws. Do's and don'ts, criminal, civil, all the other different law. The technical do's. The action points. All of that is in chronological order in one set of the story. And halfway through this week's Sedra, we start the story again. And again, it's going to be in its own order. But it's a separate new story. Same story, new narrative, retelling. And again, it's going to tell us the story all over again. And this time, we're going to highlight that in preparation to receiving the Torah, we didn't just have a bunch of action steps. There was another thing going on at the same time. There was a drive that took place in the preparation. It's about the relationship, not just about the deeds. It's about what's happening to us as a people, and more importantly, to us as an Hashem and us. The we that was being formed. Yes, there were things that were being done, but there was an undercurrent, a core that was being shifted and molded into a relationship that's being described in the second narrative. And that's not about the loss. That's about a covenant, a bond. And Moshe Rabbeinu talks to us about that. And we buy into it. And we say, Naaseh v'nishma. And this is a whole new description of what is taking place between us and Hashem. Let's just put on a couple of slides. The first thing we're going to read here is text 7 here. The giving of the Torah achieved two objectives. First, Hashem gave the Jewish people the commandments, meaning laws of the Torah. And second, through receiving the Torah, the Jewish people became Hashem's servants. As the Pasuk says, you will serve Hashem in this mountain, Mushabadim li. So in the timeline, narrative number 1, which is the beginning of last week's Sedra, the Jewish people in preparation to receive Hashem's instructions and keep his laws. And therefore we have 10 commandments. The commandments given to the Jewish people at Sinai. What was Mount Sinai's biggest highlight? The do's and the don'ts in this narrative. The command against the construction of idols fits right in. And the opening of this week's Sedra, Parshah Mishpatim, are all the continuation of the giving of the laws, what you should and shouldn't do, the laws of borrowing, of selling, of what you should do, how you behave and you don't behave in the court system. And then this week's Sedra then shifts to narrative number 2. And narrative number 2, in its order, will tell us something else. It focuses on the relationship between Hashem and his chosen people. And therefore talks about the covenant that Hashem made with the people. And the Jewish people make a collective commitment. All that Hashem spoke will be, and we will hear. So by Rashi explaining that this week's Sedra goes back to historically what took place before the giving of the Torah, but he points it out in such a way that it's before the commandment thing. The second story of Mount Sinai isn't about specific laws, it's about a deep, overarching relationship. There's one more point I wanted to make, and that is, which is more important? And we're going to say that although it's extremely important to follow the do's and the don'ts, to behave like a mensch, to behave the way Hashem wants us to behave, the starting point, even before the commandments, the way Rashi phrases is, this narrative was said before the 10 commandments. It doesn't say before Sinai. He says before the commandment part of Sinai. Because the driving motive for us, not the way it's observed, the way we feel, which one is deeper, which is more our core, is that we are a relationship people. And therefore we behave the way we do. Of course, the way we behave, first thing we do is behavior, and that's going to help us get in touch with that fascinating, deep, precious relationship. But if we ask ourselves who we are, even before we've done anything right, even before we've done anything right, we are that people who, even before the commandments, have a different side to Sinai, have a relationship with Sinai. The account in the Torah's portion, these are focused on the giving of the Torah and its commandments. The commandments, therefore, the account and preparation for the giving of the commandments focus on the commandments given to prepare the Jews for this event, abstinence, keeping a distance from the mountain, etc. By contrast, the account in the Torah portion of Mishpatim focus on the second aspect of the giving of the Torah, the covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people, through which these laws become, through which the Jews become God's servants. And this covenant was forged through the series of actions described in this account, people accepting the Torah by saying we will do and we will hear. Writing the book of the covenant and the construction of the altar, sacrifice and sprinkling blood, which are necessary mitzvahs to do for generations. It's exactly what it is we have to do. I just want to finish with this. Every time we talk about our own personal life, every challenge that we focus on, we navigate our way through, every time we try and educate ourselves, or if we're educating others, the starting point has to be, we are the home for Hashem. And therefore, we also have to make sure our actions are up to scratch. We're going to work on the actions maybe first. But what is really first, who we really are, even before we've done a single action, that is the second narrative. We might come across it second. The importance for us to know that this happens even before the actual commandments. The tabernacle, which was metaphoric for us and our service of Hashem, physical home for Hashem, embodies the ethos of containing and manifesting the great godly revelation at Sinai in a permanent space. And this is what Rashi connects. All of the second narrative will lead into the building of Terumah and Tetzaveh, next to the tree and the reading after, a home for Hashem. And Rashi points out a very interesting thing. As soon as the Sinai experience was over, the greatest revelation in history? That mountain, that space had nothing holy about it. We don't even know where Mount Sinai is. People claim to know where it is. But there's nothing unique about this place. There's no holiness left at that place, and there was nothing left the minute it was over. Because nothing had transformed. There'd been a tremendous revelation, teaching us the do's and the don'ts. But until we don't connect with that and make that ours, and it's our relationship, there hasn't been any permanent change. Permanent change doesn't come from do's and don'ts. Permanent change will come from when we go on that journey. Yes, in the system of do's and don'ts, but we allow those do's and don'ts to become the basis of a relationship, of us, of our investment, of where we're up to, how we feel about it, how we connect. That's what makes a permanent change, which is why the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was never destroyed. And it will always retain its holiness. It was buried under the Temple Mount because the holiness that is achieved through our effort, through our input, not just doing and not doing, but connecting, reaching up. When we said the story of the baby trying to reach your hands up, when we do that, that makes permanent change. Hashem should give us the koyach to enjoy and appreciate what the efforts that we make and how they really, really affect real difference and connect with Hashem. We should feel that connection. And it should bring us brachas and mitzlachas, good mazel, and all good things. And like the Rebbe Chaim Mishka would wish for all of us to see only brachas, only goodness, only happiness. Thank you very much for joining, everybody.
And thank you.
Actually, next week, I'm not sure if we'll be on. I'm going to try. All being well, B'ezras Hashem.
Okay.
I'm going to try. Okay.
And
If
see
not,
you
I apologize
Wednesday.
for now. Take care, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.